Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another EP video. The 2024 Electoral College map is shaping up to be one of the narrowest in presidential election history. As few as 6 key battlegrounds, and certainly no more than 7, are going to receive more attention from the campaigns and the media in the lead up to Election Day than the other 44 states combined. So before they get all of the attention over the coming months, let's discuss which states currently considered to be safe in either party's column are most likely to turn into swing states over the next 2 decades or so. In other words, which of the solidly blue and red states on this map are most likely to end up in the purple toss-up column 20 years from now. Before we begin this analysis, please make sure to check out my official forecast website at electionpredictionsofficial.com. It'll be the very first link in the description and comment section below. Updated monthly and soon weekly, you will see how the 2024 presidential election is taking shape based on polling data, voting patterns, shifts and trends, socio-demographic data, prediction markets, and so much more. I will be using this website in a lot of my videos going forward, so feel free to bookmark it so you can follow along. Alrighty, let's start with a little bit of history. As recently as 1988, just 8 presidential election cycles ago, California voted Republican for a 6th consecutive election. It is now a D+30 state. More recently, in the 1996 election, West Virginia voted to re-elect Bill Clinton, marking the 14th time in the previous 17 elections that West Virginia voted for the Democratic presidential candidate. Yes, the same West Virginia that just voted for Donald Trump by 40 percentage points in 2020, his second largest margin in any state. And even more recently now, shifting over to 2012, Democrat Barack Obama carried Iowa and Ohio by around 5 percentage points in 2012. Both states are practically now off the board for Democrats just 1 decade later, as Trump won them both by more than 8 points in both 2016 and 2020. On the flip side, Republican Mitt Romney carried Georgia and Arizona by near double-digit margins in 2012, marking the 8th straight election that at least one of these 2 Sunbelt states voted Republican. Yet flash forward to 2020 again, Joe Biden carried both states over Donald Trump. Now, generally speaking, swing states, also known as battlegrounds, are defined by one or both of 2 characteristics. First, swing states, as in the name, are those that literally swing between voting for Republican and Democratic candidates from one election to the next. Heading into the 2024 presidential election, the states that voted for Republican Donald Trump in 2016, before then flipping to Democrat Joe Biden in 2020, are those you see most often highlighted as this November's swing states. These include Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Now, the second characteristic of a swing state, or a battleground, is consistently narrow margins from election to election, usually less than 3 to 5 percentage points in either direction. Such close margins suggest that these states could have easily swung the other way had just a few things gone differently. In the 2020 election, just 8 states were decided by a margin of less than 5 percentage points. These include all of the aforementioned swing states, in addition to North Carolina, Florida, and all the way over here, Nevada. All 3 were actually also decided by less than 5 points in the 2016 election between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump as well. That being said, though, the state of Florida is not really considered to be a true battleground in 2024 because of its strong rightward shift over the last 2 cycles. Trump's 3.4-point margin of victory in 2020 marked one of just 6 states where he improved on his margin from 2016, and it meant that Florida shifted 5.5 points more Republican than the nation between those elections. And more recently, in the 2022 midterms, Republicans swept all statewide offices, including governor and U.S. Senate, by 19 and 16 points, respectively. So, not including Florida, North Carolina, and Nevada join the 5 literal swing states on your screen here as 2024's battlegrounds. Now, that's not a lot. In fact, 7 is easily the lowest number of states that we would classify as battlegrounds in modern presidential electoral history. Even if we were to try to extend this number to states that are truly in play for either party, I'd struggle to name more than 12. That is truly unprecedented. At this point in the 2020 election, for example, at least 20 states were considered in play for either party, according to most early forecaster ratings. And in 2016, that number was even higher. Ultimately, this trend towards a much smaller battleground map is due to the fact that we are in a truly ahistorical era of extremely competitive elections. No candidate has won the popular votes by double digits since 1984, and 40 out of 50 U.S. states have repeatedly voted for either the Democratic or Republican nominee in each of the last 4 elections, a level of consistency not seen since the early 20th century. Most states simply just don't swing anymore. Again, going back into history, out of the past 8 presidential elections, the 1992 race between Democrat Bill Clinton and incumbent Republican George H.W. Bush saw the highest number of states switch party allegiance. Clinton flipped a total of 22 states that had voted Republican in the election of 1988. It is often cited as a year of political realignment. Clinton won states in every region of the country. He swept the Northeast and the West Coast, marking the start of Democratic dominance in both regions. He also performed well in the Eastern Midwest, the Mountain West, Appalachia, and parts of the South. Since that 1992 election, 26 states, as pictured here, have been decided by less than a 3-point margin in at least one election. This includes Florida and Nevada, which have actually seen such tight margins in 5 of the last 8 elections, as well as Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and New Hampshire, which were decided by less than 3% in 4 of those elections. So with all of that history in mind, the purpose of this video today is to identify which states that have not been considered swing states in recent years will become competitive over the next couple decades. While it is true that the electoral college map in the 21st century has been as static as ever in American history, it's still reasonable to assume that at least a couple of states that have voted either Republican or Democrat by large margins over the last couple elections will see some sort of shift towards competitiveness. Don't just take my word for it, though. Take a look here as I cycle through the last 8 elections dating back to 1988. The states colored in pink on these maps were decided by less than 3% in that year's election. You'll see here how even as the map has narrowed, some states have shifted pretty strongly. In 1988, here, for example, you see Washington and Illinois. Republican presidential candidates have not targeted either of these now safely Democratic states in over 2 decades. Then in 1992, there's Montana and New Jersey, now safe states on both sides. In 1996, we have Kentucky and Tennessee. They both voted for Trump by more than 20 points in 2020. Then once we get to 2000, you start to see maps become more and more similar to what we've come to expect nowadays. But even in 2008, Montana, Missouri, and Indiana, Obama won Indiana in this election and came within a point in Missouri. Both are now safely Republican, along with Montana. 2012, 2016, we talked about Ohio and Iowa's trend, and then here we are in 2020. Now again, to truly try and identify some wildcard swing state newcomers, we have to focus on the states that have not been considered battlegrounds in recent memory. Since the 1988 election, 20 states and Washington, D.C. have voted for the same party in every presidential election. Of these 20 states, only 3, Minnesota in 2016 and 2000, Oregon in 2000, and Washington in 1988, have ever had close elections. And as you can see here, of these 20 states again, 7 have consistently voted for the Democratic presidential candidate since 1988, and 13 have consistently voted for the Republican presidential candidate. Now, while there was some speculation that Texas, the Lone Star State, would become a swing state in 2020, or as soon as 2020, Trump's margin of victory was still 5.5%. So that gives us 28 states on this map here to choose from. The first route that we could go down is simply pick from the closest races in 2020. The partisan lean of Minnesota, for example, is only around D+3, and Trump came within a point and a half of breaking the Democrats' 10-election win streak in 2016. If the political environment does move hard towards Republicans in 2024, Biden may become vulnerable in Minnesota. But when I first came up with the idea for this video, I didn't want to go down this easy route. Instead, if I am picking a true sleeper swing state currently on the Republican side, my money is on Alaska or Utah. Alaska's use of ranked choice voting has created a potential ideological shift in the state, where moderate Democrats are increasingly favored. Mary Peltola, for example, the Democratic representative who won both the special and general election for Alaska's lone U.S. House district last year, is sometimes called a pro-guns, pro-fish Democrat for her pro-gun and pro-conservation stances that made her popular among moderate Republicans opposed to Sarah Palin's Trump-backed candidacy. Enough voters ranked Peltola either as their first or second choice on their ballot to help push her over the finish line. Donald Trump himself only won Alaska by about 10 points in 2020, down 5 points from his 2016 margin, as the state's margin has gotten increasingly less Republican over the last 4 decades. In fact, since Ronald Reagan carried Alaska by 37 points in 1984, Democrats have increasingly received a higher and higher share of the presidential vote than the previous election on 6 occasions. Joe Biden also became the first Democrat to receive a majority of the votes in Anchorage, Alaska's largest city, since 1964, and nationwide exit polling conducted by Edison Research showed Trump winning the support of veterans in Alaska over Biden by only 10 points, a major decline from 2016 when he led Hillary Clinton by 26 points among this key demographic group in the state. Also, and perhaps most importantly within this context, as of the 2020 election, 58% of voters in Alaska are registered as unaffiliated, undeclared, or independent, the highest proportion of any states. All of that being said, Alaska is of course a unique state in more ways than one, and so while all of the signs point towards it becoming potentially in play for Democrats down the road, I wouldn't be totally shocked if it also pulled a complete 360 and started trending back in favor of Republicans either. It is perhaps the least predictable state in the union. Now on that topic of political uniqueness, I've also picked Utah, in large part because of the state's severe aversion to Trump and Trumpism since 2016. In 2016, independent candidate Evan McMullen was able to win 22% of the vote in Utah, making Trump the only Republican candidate since 1964 not to win at least 50% of the vote in the state. Then in 2018, Utah voters elected Trump skeptic Mitt Romney to the Senate, and in 2022, McMullen won 43% of the vote against incumbent Republican Senator Mike Lee. All of this begs the question, of course, how much is the state really going to continue to shift left after Trump leaves the political stage? Well, there are several notable pro-Democrat data points to note here beyond just Trump. Utah is a notably urbanized state, relatively speaking. In fact, it is the most urban state to vote for Trump by more than 10 percentage points, and even ranks ahead of 7 states that Biden won in 2020. That matters because the political divide between urban and rural Americans is growing, and statistically speaking, the more urban a state is, the more likely it is to vote Democratic. The 4 most urban states, according to 538, New York, New Jersey, California, and Massachusetts, are some of the deepest blue states in the country, while the 3 most rural, Wyoming, Montana, and South Dakota, are deeply Republican. Back in 2016, 10 of the 13 most urban states voted for Hillary Clinton, while 12 of the 14 most rural states voted for Trump. The only exceptions were the fairly urbanized states of Florida, Arizona, and Texas, which went for Trump, and the more rural states of Vermont and Maine up in New England, which cast their ballots for Clinton. Now, this trend actually grew stronger in 2020 as Joe Biden won 15 of the 17 most urban states, with the only exceptions being Florida and Texas, which only voted for Trump by 3% and 6% respectively. To better visualize all of this, 538 created a hypothetical scenario in which the 2020 presidential election results were based on the relationship between their urbanization index and 2016's results. And here's what the map would have looked like. It does look a little odd, right? But it's not that weird when you really look at it. After all, this is one way in which American politics are trending. And sure enough, here is Utah colored in blue. Outside of urbanization, Utah also ranks 12th in the country in proportion of residents with a college degree, the highest of any Trump states, as education polarization grows wider and wider. In fact, all 14 other states ranked in the top 15 in educational attainment voted for Joe Biden by at least 7 points in the 2020 election. Utah is also the youngest state in the U.S., and by a pretty wide margin, which also tends to favor Democrats, as their coalition does tend to be younger, while older voters lean more conservative. That being said, if Utah fits the bill on the Republican side as a state that could trend towards Democrats due to its urbanization and highly educated population, then the natural argument on the other side would be that Vermont and Maine, which rank as the 5th and 7th most rural states, respectively, may trend towards Republicans. But that is exactly where the other major trend in American politics that we touched on in Utah comes into play: the educational divide. Vermont checks in as the 4th most educated state in the country based on the proportion of its population with a bachelor's degree, while Maine also ranks in the top 20. Why does this matter? Well, the gap between partisan affiliations of those with and without college degrees accelerated dramatically in the Trump era. All the way back in 1960, Democrat John F. Kennedy lost college-educated voters by a 2-to-1 margin, yet won the presidency thanks to his overwhelming support among white voters without a degree. 60 years later, this is almost entirely flipped. Joe Biden lost non-college educated white voters by a 2-to-1 margin in 2020, while securing 60% of the college-educated vote. Biden won 18 of the 19 highest-ranking states in educational attainment, while Trump won 15 of the 17 lowest-ranked states. Meanwhile, Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, and North Carolina, 5 of our 2024 battlegrounds, all rank in the middle of the pack between 23rd and 34th. Also, following the 2022 midterm elections, Democrats now control 3/4 of the highest-ranking congressional districts in educational attainment, while Republicans control 2/3 of the lowest-ranking districts. Because of this strengthening trend, it's hard to see Vermont and Maine shifting towards Republicans anytime soon. So with that said, is there a current Democratic state that is both less urban and less educated than its peers, and could I see it taking the political red pill over the next decade or so? Well, the first state that actually comes to mind here is New Mexico, even though we crossed it off our list, because it has been somewhat competitive for 2 decades, and voted Republican as recently as 2004. New Mexico does rank as the 12th least educated state in the country, the lowest of any Biden state besides swing state Nevada, and is also the 15th most rural, which ranks right behind Vermont and Maine among the least urban Democratic states. It's also the only plurality Hispanic state in the U.S., and so if Democrats keep on seeing erosion in their base of support among Hispanic voters, that could potentially make up some of the Republican deficit. Otherwise, it is harder to identify solid blue states that will trend Republican, while it's probably easier to identify current swing states that'll move towards the right, like Wisconsin and Nevada. If I had to name some more fringy states, I may think of Hawaii, Delaware, and potentially a state like Oregon or New Jersey, but I don't see any of those 4 actually voting Republican anytime soon. That is all though for today's video. Let me know what other videos you would like to see in the future. Shout out to my channel members on screen here. Thank you so much for your support. If you would like to become a member, go ahead and click the like button down below to receive exclusive perks. I would really appreciate it if you could like this video below if you did, and subscribe while you're at it. You can check out more content from my channel here, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. EP out.